The Torah this week warns against being a holy pretender, warns against being too much a critic of Jewish law and a believer in excessive self-expression. The Torah describes a responsibility to respect the sages and the teachers of Israel. And through Parshat Korah and the description of Korah's open rebellion, Korah's mob, and confrontation with the leaders of Israel, the Torah encourages an embrace of our holy laws and rituals, and asks us to understand the multidimensional realities of the approaches we might have that seemingly on the surface require people to give up or sacrifice, but in the end create salient holiness. The Torah says, beware a holy pretender. Beware demagoguery. Be warned, there are those who are seductive, but who offer facile and simplistic understandings of deeply complex moral frameworks. Korah sounded like he knew what he was talking about. And not only that, like he had an absolutely brilliant argument against this Mosaic and Aharonite leadership. We're all holy. Everyone's holy. Sounds right. Sounds enticing. But offering true leadership was not what Korah was doing. He was using his place as a son of a prominent family, with wealth and power, with personality and through his persuasion, to say that Moses and Aaron and Miriam must be wrong, that society is not going the right way, that our foundational document, the Torah, can't be a document that realizes the potential that I am telling you exists in everyone. We're all holy. And yet, the Torah warns against this pretension. God's goals may only come true with a complex systems of law and instructions about cultural norms, halachic norms that create unity among a people towards the goal of creating a holy society. Do not be seduced by that open rebellion when someone has what seems like a one-line claim that people can rally around and forget the nuances and forget the complexities and forget that so many individual human beings need to live within a societal framework. Korah was clever enough to present to the people a distorted picture of Moshe Rabbeinu as an unfeeling, uncaring leader who was concerned only with assuming that all would follow because Moses, the man from Sinai, said so. That he was worried more about amassing wealth for himself and his family and centralizing power. It was, of course, twisted and distorted and one-sided. And Korah purposely ignored the many mitzvot that were designed to become a system of unification of the people in the pursuits of righteousness that Abraham and Sarah promised their ancestors would be engaged in. What if we wore a tallis that was all blue? Would we have to put those tzitzit on the corner with threads of techelet, with threads of that turquoise dye? What if you look at the system and the widow who's harvesting in her field has to separate off the tithe and give that tzedakah? Is that unfair? For she is the widow. Without understanding all of the protections built in for the weakest among us, without taking into consideration the systemic approach of all people engaged in leaving the corners of their fields for the poor. Korach's true argument with Moses was not one of ideas or of substance or how to realize a very complex moral framework of holiness. It was that he came from a great family, and he too should be able to have that throne of power. But indeed, that's what he wanted, a throne, as opposed to a seat of ruling with greater understandings of the designs of God in mind. Korah was and did. He was enticing the people to come to his side because of what sounded like an easy value statement to get behind. But he was unwilling to do the work, and he did not offer any other type of leadership idea or social policy to follow through with. Was he calling for new elections? Calling for Moses and Aaron to step down? Did he himself want to step up and step in, learn what was done before, and offer a new approach for accomplishing the kind of mitzvah action that unifies the Jewish people? None of that was in the parsha. None of it at all. In the end, we're aware of what happened to Korah and his followers. The earth opened wide. The mouth that was set aside by God before creation, the mouth of the earth opened wide and swallowed Korah and his followers. They went the way of the earth. Those who read the Torah realistically might understand that Korah and his band needed to be exiled from the camp. There are those who might surmise that a special force was yet again sent out with weapons to take care of business the way that they needed to after the sin of the golden calf and assassinate the potential threats. Or one really could understand and read that at that time, God needed to decisively show us and teach us that such rebels who were demagogues needed to be swallowed up by the earth so that, God willing, they would be no longer. Of course, leadership based in personality and that kind of seduction was not only a problem in Korach's generation. Reading the Parsha this year made me think deeply about another messianic pretender named Shabbatei Tzvi. He was born on August 1st in 1626. That year it was also Tisha B'Av. Nothing good was coming of that. Shabbatei Tzvi was born in the town of Izmir in Turkey. And his family was originally from Greece. And his family was wealthy and prosperous and prominent. And Shabbatei Tzvi would make use of that, not only to work his way into the study hall, but to work his way into the study of mysticism and Kabbalah. Abusing the power of mystical Jewish creativity early on, Shabbatei Tzvi became a naysayer about traditional ways of practicing Jewish life, as opposed to the traditional, even Jewish mystical Kabbalistic outlook, that one was to make new meanings of very traditional mitzvah living. Shabbatei Tzvi began to flagrantly violate Jewish law, even in public. Those practices would come to be known as Ma'asim Zarim, strange or paradoxical acts among his followers, Sabbatians as we call them. There was some support for him in Izmir, even when his odd behavior became a norm. But eventually, the Jewish leadership in the town had an emergency meeting, and they decided to expel him. He was 25 years old. Rebellious in his spirit, he was musically talented, he was handsome, he was charming, he was charismatic, he was very diplomatic, quite a great conversationalist, fluent in several languages, wide knowledge in a variety of subjects. He used this as a demagogue in the next town that he arrived in, Salonika, or Thessaloniki as we call it in Greece. The story is told that one day, given all that power, he invited all the local rabbis to his home who were taken by him, this young Jewish personality. And he set up a wedding canopy in his yard. There, he proceeded to perform a marriage between himself and a Torah scroll, as if he was marrying a woman. The rabbis were shocked by this bizarre behavior, and they immediately arranged to have him evicted from Salonika. He was gone in a matter of days. He went back to Turkey, on to Constantinople, and there the first tale of strange behavior, Ma'aseh Zar, was recorded as that time when he purchased a large dead fish, put it into a crib, and announced to startled onlookers that the fish represented a childlike Jewish nation in need of Geulah, in need of redemption. He calls for a 7-day festival that he names the Festival Week ceremony. And over the course of 1 week, he celebrates the High Holy Days, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot all at once. At the outset of my remarks this Shabbat, I said, the excessive self-expression that comes along with belief that one is a false hope for the Jewish people is part of what this week's Parsha, Korah, warns against. At the conclusion of that strange week that Shabbatei Tzvi created, he took from the morning blessings the standard Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim, who frees the captive, referring back to that glorious time that the slaves were freed from Egypt. And he used and transformed that blessing, matir asurim, who frees the captive, to create a blessing to matir, permit, the asurim, that which is forbidden. And in the public square, he took a piece of pork, uttered that blessing with the altered understanding, explained its new meaning, and proceeded to eat that piece of treif. Local rabbis reacted harshly, and they arranged for Shabbatei Tzvi to be publicly flogged. Now, you could say what you want about rabbinic authority at the time and punishments in public, but without any consequences, can a legal system truly help those find their way into embracing the foundational moral goodness at the heart of the system. Though we no longer punish for ritual transgression, such as what one eats, the question really is, when it comes to foundational morality within legal systems, whether or not we can understand the need for authorities who set significant boundaries and who, though they support the agency of individuals, even individuals with creative spirits, also create backstops so that excessive selfhood and egoism and demagoguery are left out of the equation when it comes to advancement. Shabbatei Tzvi traveled towards Israel and made a stopover in Egypt. He ultimately met a man named Natan of Gaza, who egged him on and had him proclaiming himself the Messiah of the Jewish people. And for the first time, he made that proclamation on the 17th of Sivan, coinciding with May 31st, 1665. He called himself the King of the Jews and the Redeemer of Israel. Of course, Shabbatei Tzvi and Natan of Gaza were both ridiculed. And as they, in their fever pitch way, tried to convince the Jewish people that everyone was holy and here was the new way of approaching Jewish tradition, the leadership in the cities and lands where they traveled to send their messages ultimately were given no real support. The earth, in a sense, opened to swallow them as well. In this case, they were not swallowed up by an earthquake, nor was there a miraculous mouth. They weren't assassinated, per se, by the Jewish troops or a force, and they weren't exiled and put in cherem by rabbis. In the end, the Turkish authorities, who were alerted to this kind of mob-making, Sabbatian, false messianic movement, they got wind of the affair, and an emergency meeting was called with the rational Jewish leadership. And Shabbatei Tzvi was taken from his ship sailing to Constantinople, and they arrested and brought to the Sultan of Turkey. In the end, Shabbatei Tzvi was converted to Islam at the demand of the court, or because he was a willing spiritual journeyman who was just in it for himself, just in it to stay alive, just in it to connect with the ruling class of his day. The idea of a false messiah, the idea of a rebel who leads the way by making it easy to latch on to a simplistic moral code, is, the Torah says, an enticing idea. But in the end, does not express the kind of value system nor leadership quotient that we need in a world of deeply complex moral frameworks. and a need for culture and a need for legislation that helps us move as actors with agents, each of us, towards the expression of holiness that the Torah truly envisions for Am Yisrael, for the Jewish people, and for the families of the world. Shabbat Shalom.